In case you've been living under a rock, Nintendo has been getting a lot of grief lately from their player base, and rightfully so. In this video, I'm going to cover not just Nintendo's lawsuit of Palworld, but even another high-profile lawsuit that is eerily similar too. It's a lot, let's get into it. As you may or may not know, Nintendo is suing Pocket Pair over Palworld, which has caused many to view Nintendo in a very negative light for not wanting competitors within a similar space to them. Which makes sense since Palworld sold something like 10 million copies plus right out of the gate and took over the internet for a few months when it first came out. And if a team that's a fraction of the size of yours suddenly released a game that was getting sales numbers close to your flagship series even, yeah, you would hit the panic button until it breaks too. Although in Nintendo's case, the lawsuit more so has to do with mechanics instead of the creature-like designs. They're suing over the use of Pokeball-like devices capturing creatures, and the more nebulous claim that Nintendo somehow owns the right to riding your creatures in a game as transport. Yeah, it's weird, but what inspired this video is this article from Screen Rant. Nintendo's Palworld lawsuit is probably just the beginning, as Screen Rant opens their article with, besides the money wasted on these lawsuits and more, that the big issue is what this could spell for the future of lawsuits and how companies go about them, as Screen Rant says here. That is because the extremely divisive Palworld lawsuit has more or less opened the floodgates for additional litigation from other developers. We are already beginning to see the ramifications of this questionable crusade against Pocket Pair, as another high-profile developer and publisher has sued a similarly high-profile publisher over its upcoming game. While it's not like there have been no copyright infringement claims prior to this, the Palworld lawsuit is the start of an entire new era of litigation. The example that Screen Rant brings up is a game that I have been getting comments to cover over and over, and it's another reason why I'm making this video in the first place. But anyway, that game is Light of Motirum. You may or may not have heard about this, but trust me, this does tie to Nintendo and Palworld really well, so let me explain. One look at Light of Motirum in action, and I can probably guess that the majority of you watching this just mistook this reveal trailer to be some sort of spin-off of the Horizon series from PlayStation. I mean, just look at this footage on screen. The way the robotic animals look, even down to the lens flares and their eyes, and especially how the human characters are dressed, is very, very reminiscent of Horizon in more ways than one. And as it turns out, Sony, like Nintendo, they want to nuke Light of Motirum from orbit and completely destroy the game in a similar fashion to how Nintendo wants to also destroy Palworld. And also, if you enjoy the content, consider liking the video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to keep up to date. It helps out a lot, thank you. But Sony's lawsuit also brings to light, no pun intended as it says here, both featured a red-haired protagonist with a penchant for bows and spears, as well as a world overrun by dinosaur-esque robots. It isn't hard to see why Sony claimed that Light of Motirum is a slavish clone of its Horizon games and is seeking $150,000 in all of the game's materials so it can destroy them. So both the Sony and Nintendo lawsuits are existing for different yet equal reasons in my opinion. Palworld is being sued because it's a monster capturing game that also uses Pokeball-esque items, and in Nintendo's mind that damages their brand. In Sony's eyes, Light of Motirum is a clone of the Horizon games down to their artistic qualities, their world design, and especially the way the monsters look. And in terms of which of these are more in peril of being erased, I would honestly have to go with Palworld. For the very simple reason that Pocket Pair is much smaller both in size and finances compared to Nintendo. In the Sony lawsuit, they're suing none other than Tencent, who's arguably just as big if not bigger than most other publishers combined. In case you don't know, Tencent's like a massive Chinese company, so they have the money and time to fight Sony over this no problem. But Screen Rant then brings up a good point. Nintendo losing the Palworld lawsuit won't stop it or other publishers from suing smaller developers with fewer resources than Pocket Pair for similar reasons. As aforementioned, Nintendo has frequently threatened to sue smaller creators and fan projects that it believes infringes on its copyrights. Therefore, nothing is stopping it from taking down future projects that utilize a similar design language as Palworld did, and it's true, sadly. Not necessarily designs or anything like that, but recently, as seen here from Games Radar, Nintendo forced a Japanese speedrun event to remove their games due to unauthorized use. The event, which is like Games Done Quick but in Japan obviously, was meant to raise money for charities to benefit Doctors Without Borders, as it says here. Nintendo said that as a legal entity, they would have to ask for permission in advance to use any of the publisher's titles in future events. I just don't really understand Nintendo sometimes. It's not like they're using your games to benefit themselves, and even if they were, why is that even a problem? Live streaming yourself playing games is totally normal. There's plenty of full game walkthroughs, cutscene compilations, and more, involving all sorts of Nintendo games on YouTube, Twitch, and then some. And I mean, Nintendo, if you ask me, has everything backwards. And this just paints them in a more negative light because, again, the games were being played for a charity event to support doctors helping people around the world. But this is how Nintendo operates. They're old school to a fault at times, and this bears repeating that this proves time and again that Nintendo truly does believe that nobody owns the games they buy from them besides Nintendo themselves. Although, I may have to retract my statement that Palworld might be more cooked than litigation, since there was this part from this article that's on screen as you can see where Sony is suing Tencent over all of this too. And this one part here, it definitely raises an eyebrow, which states, Sony said in its complaint that it declined an offer from Tencent to collaborate on a new Horizon game last year. Tencent later announced Light of Motirum, which Sony said features identical gameplay, story themes, and artistic elements to Horizon, as well as many other similarities. Yeah, that's not a good sign. If you wanted to make a game in that series and then got told no by the people that own it, and then you went off and made a game that is basically in that series but not really, but shifted around some elements, yeah, that's gonna cause some problems. Although, in my opinion, while yes, Lightum Motirum and Palworld both absolutely do take elements from Horizon and Pokemon, my opinion is still that neither of these games will be removed from digital storefronts or anything like that. Because ultimately, while the games may have similarities, as long as they're different enough, and that's key, different enough, nothing technically can happen to them. I mean, Lightum Motirum, for God's sake, straight up has what is so clearly also a ripoff of a ghost from Destiny 2. But again, that still wouldn't be enough for, say, Bungie to sue Tencent either, and fun fact, Sony owns Bungie, so that might help them as well, but still. And really, when it also comes to gameplay, that's where it gets even more nebulous. I mean, in Palworld's case, it's more so a third-person shooter game, something Pokemon very obviously is not doing. And even if Pokemon somehow was a third-person shooter, even still, they couldn't sue Pocket Pair anyways. Because you don't own the rights to a specific style of gameplay, even if you like to think that you do. Games have obviously taken very big inspirations from other works of art in the past. This is the case quite literally all over the place. With this same argument in mind, the manga Berserk, they could technically sue every single Soulsborne game From Software has ever made. For example, look here at how Millennia's helmet in Elden Ring looks strikingly similar to a character in Berserk. How Blythe strikes a similar pose in Wolfface and all to that of Guts in his armor. And how one of the starting class armors looks very similar to Griffith's prison guard before, all that demon stuff happens, of course. Or how many enemy types within Dark Souls are essentially carbon copies of Kentaro Miura's designs within Berserk 2. Like the Taurus demon here, the distinct sharpness of the dragons, or the cobra-headed humanoid enemies in Dark Souls. Or how that one really cool enemy type in Dark Souls 3 is shown here looks very, very similar to another design from Berserk as well. Or how Gale sits with his sword, similarly too to Guts in Berserk. Even Shadow of the Erdtree's Mesmer sports a similar helmet compared to the Dragon Knight in Berserk as well. And you even have the giant Wickerman enemies in Shadows that are also from Berserk too. Like, I could keep going, but the point here is that with this in mind, would you, in good faith, believe that From Software should be legally viable to be sued into the depths of Drangleic because of these sorts of things? Or is this a case of homages that are used because Hidetaka Miyazaki, who's the director of many of these games shown, is a massive fan of Berserk specifically and it inspired him? As you can see, this is why it muddies the waters. Now this video has grown beyond just Nintendo. This is about everything. We have to admit that everything out there, it pulls from something. As a human being, your thoughts, your opinions, and ideas, whether you like to admit it or not, are inspired by something you either saw or experienced in your life. Miyazaki, by the way, back when making Dark Souls, for example, here's an article from almost 9 years ago from Destructoid, where Miyazaki felt as if the comparison between Dark Souls and Zelda felt unworthy to him. So at this point, Miyazaki was being interviewed by a website called Glixel at the time, where he said this about the comparisons to Zelda. If there are similarities, they probably stem from the fact that The Legend of Zelda became a sort of textbook for 3D action games. It's funny how certain games become shining examples of their genre and never seem to be topped in terms of innovation. Miyazaki had more to say. When I was a student, The Legend of Zelda was truly monumental, so to be perfectly honest, I feel deeply unworthy of the comparison. Our goal was to allow players to do what they want, to find their own goals, make their own discoveries, embrace their own values, and find their own interpretations. So here we have Miyazaki, not denying that The Legend of Zelda absolutely did inspire the Souls series of games. And again, from those games you now have many other games that also too pull from Miyazaki's design philosophy as well. Most recent example is Wuchang Fallen Feathers, which I recently completed myself and I'm currently playing it in New Game Plus in order to platinum it. But I think the point of all of these comparisons is simple, which is that the game industry, like any others, they all follow trends. They take what is clearly working and then they find a way to make it work within their own design. This is how we had the deluge of first-person shooter games back in the early 2000s to even now, how multiplayer games and stuff like kill streaks, score streaks, your weapon customization, the experience points when you shoot somebody in like Call of Duty or Battlefield, all of it stems from concepts in games made prior to the ones that exist now. And if Palworld were to be successfully sued, it means that Nintendo can then destroy anything like them. They could then, in theory, go after Dark Souls, Elden Ring, and more. And I mean, what then happens with something like Light of Motirum? As seen here in its gameplay debut, Light of Motirum very clearly also features what looks a lot like Monster Hunter-esque combat. But you could also argue it's somewhat Souls-like combat too, and while neither comparison would be wrong, what happens then? Could Capcom then jump in and sue Tencent for allegedly ripping off their Monster Hunter formula too? But then you have the same case that could be made against Horizon as well, which also rips off Monster Hunter in terms of how you can fight these robotic dinosaurs the same way you can in Monster Hunter. Not robotic, but you get the point. And also break off the key parts of their bodies by doing enough damage, and then you use those parts to upgrade for your weapons and armor, a key element that Monster Hunter pretty much has coined as well. So could Capcom then sue Horizon for ripping them off as well, or could Microsoft even sue Guerrilla Games, which are the developers that made Horizon in the first place, and more importantly, their previous one, which was the Killzone series, because they ripped off Halo when making Killzone. After all, Killzone was always coined to be the Halo killer when it first came out. You see what I mean? This litigation whataboutisms, they keep funneling deeper and deeper, which is why, personally, I don't think that either of these lawsuits will be in the favor of the companies who started it. I mean, even games like Daemon X Machina Titanic Scion, which is the game on screen that you're seeing right now, it looks like Armored Core had a baby with Xenoblade. Even the previews for the game claim that it has many similarities to Xenoblade specifically. Again, I don't think that means that it would also be grounds to ban or sue that game in any similar way. It's also like how so many RPGs, they all pull from games like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy as well. The truth is that it's going to be really hard for Nintendo or even Sony to pull this off against their competitors. The only way Sony somehow could win their lawsuit is if they could prove that Tencent 100% ripped them off and used almost identical designs down to the very pixel. But even then, Tencent has their hands in so many games and franchises already, they've gotten away with far worse in the past without people even noticing. For example, in February 2025, Tencent won a case and got $85 million in damages after another company in Taiwan used their video content on their services without compensating them or even getting their permission. Screen Rant then brings up a point which says that developers of all sizes should focus on original ideas and thus avoid any potential copyright infringement cases. But this is technically impossible to do these days because every game to some capacity is a copy or reimagining of something that already exists. Trends have always been a thing, and all these lawsuits will do, if they win in Nintendo or Sony's favor, will just create a lack of content being made. If you ask me, nobody really owns the rights to robotic dinosaurs getting hit with arrows, the same way nobody owns the right to a game featuring cute monsters and leveling them up. To suggest that any one of these companies should stay in their own lane with their own ideas and nothing can cross over is just frankly impossible. As I said in my previous video about Nintendo and Palworld and all of that, I suggested that if Nintendo wins their lawsuit, it could very well spawn many more like it, and then this Sony Horizon lawsuit just happened, and yeah, that proves it. It's just the needle being pushed further, the point of no return crossing over faster and faster with each move. As Yardbreaker.com says here, Pocket Pair, the makers of Palworld, are also using their success to just keep expanding their publishing side, which just gets them even more money. And Nintendo likely sees Pocket Pair as a threat that can keep growing exponentially unless their gravy train, so to speak, is stopped at the source, which is Palworld. Because this is how new big companies start, and Nintendo clearly doesn't want Pocket Pair to get any bigger. Because the bigger they are, the harder they'll be to defeat. And ultimately, the lawsuit of Palworld was only really the beginning of what could very easily become a new era of companies swinging their money around to see who they can screw over next. Light of Motirum is further proof that there is hunger and talent willing to make games that dip their toes into similar waters. And again, now that these two lawsuits exist, what else could happen? Maybe in Sony's case, the best case scenario would be to take Light of Motirum, retrofit it, and work with Tencent to turn it into a proper Horizon game. But I don't really think that Sony America at least will like that, because the main character of Light isn't an ugly westernized main character, so maybe that's another reason why they also want it gone. And then in Nintendo's case, Palworld will just never cease to exist. And in due time, it will likely only keep getting larger as time goes on, and I truly hope that Nintendo loses their lawsuit. Because if they're successful here, the entire industry is going to be worse off because of it, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, subscribe to keep up to date, and I'll see you next time.